Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meier. Our top story: the U.S. is reopening visa interviews for foreign students, but this time all applicants must unlock their social media accounts for government screening. The Pentagon chief is urging Congress to approve a $1 trillion defense budget for 2026, citing the growing need to counter threats from China as the department's main focus.
Indo-Pacific is our priority theater and China is our pacing threat. That's why I've traveled twice to that region to visit our forces and meet with our allies and partners.
Is China quietly backing Iran in its fight against Israel? From major oil deals to mystery cargo planes flying toward Tehran, we take a closer look at Beijing's latest moves. And TikTok getting another 90-day extension. President Trump signed an executive order delaying the ban, giving more time for potential buyers to step in. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meier. Before we dive into today's news, make sure to use the link down below to subscribe to our newsletter. Each week we round up the highlights and controversies happening around China and the world, and share an exclusive behind-the-scenes snapshot with our readers. Keep an eye out. The newsletter will land in your inbox Friday morning. The State Department is resuming U.S. student visa applications after a 3-week pause, but with a new requirement. Applicants must now provide access to their social media accounts for government review. The move is expected to impact Chinese students in particular, the second largest group of foreign students in the U.S. Just weeks ago, Secretary of State Marco Rubio warned the U.S. would aggressively revoke visas for Chinese nationals tied to the Communist Party or those studying sensitive fields. The State Department says the new visa rule is part of a bigger effort to improve U.S. visa checks using all information, including applicants' social media, to screen people who might be a security risk. Students applying for visas will now have to make their social media accounts public so the U.S. government can review them. Those who fail to comply risk visa denial. Last month, the State Department briefly stopped visa interviews for foreign students while preparing to expand social media vetting protocols. Currently, over 275,000 Chinese students hold U.S. visas. This new move comes amid escalating tensions between Washington and Beijing, driven by concerns over espionage, infiltration, and trade disputes. China is playing a growing role in the escalating Israel-Iran conflict, not just snapping up cheap Iranian oil, but possibly funneling weapons and missile fuel to Tehran. So far, Israel has avoided striking Iran's oil export hubs. But if that changes, Beijing risks losing a major energy source of cheap crude. In light of these developments, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt responded to questions about China's military backing of Iran earlier Thursday. Here's what she said.
Do you have any reaction to Xi Jinping's offer of intervening in Iran diplomatically? And are you seeing any signs that China would get involved militarily to support Iran?
I don't believe we're seeing any signs of that at this moment in time. As for Xi Jinping's offer, I will leave it to the president to respond to that himself.
But concerns persist over Beijing's growing ties to Tehran. A report this week says Iran is exporting about 1.7 million barrels of oil a day, and more than 90% of it is going to China. That's because the U.S. reimposed sanctions on Iran in 2018, after President Trump pulled the U.S. out of the Iran nuclear deal during his first term. The goal: to block Iran's nuclear ambitions and cut off funding for its regional proxies. Since then, China has continued buying Iranian oil, often paying in its own currency. That limits how Iran can use the money. It must be spent on Chinese imports. That oil revenue is now seen as a key source of funding for Iran's war efforts against Israel. But China's ties to Iran go beyond energy. Reports suggest Beijing has also supported Iran's missile and nuclear programs, including shipments of missile fuel ingredients. In fact, since January, China has reportedly been sending missile fuel materials to Iran. In a separate instance last Friday, after Israel struck Tehran, a Chinese cargo plane flew toward Iran and vanished from radar near its airspace. 2 more followed in the next days, all flying similar routes. All 3 aircraft were Boeing 747 freighters, commonly used to transport heavy-duty military equipment. But without further inspections, what those flights carried remains unknown. According to some news reports, China has a history of supplying missile-related materials to Iran despite international criticism. An analyst specializing in China and the Middle East said that while open military support from China is unlikely, the possibility can't be ruled out. On Capitol Hill, Defense Secretary Hegseth testified Wednesday on the Pentagon's budget request of over $1 trillion for fiscal year 2026. But rising threats from Communist China's unprecedented military buildup to the escalating conflict between Israel and Iran have some lawmakers calling for even more defense spending. NTD's Luis Adoro Martinez has the story.
The Indo-Pacific is our priority theater and China is our pacing threat. That's why I've traveled twice to that region to visit our forces and meet with our allies and partners. We applaud those allies who are stepping up, but others need to do more and quickly.
The White House is requesting over $1 trillion for the Department of Defense for fiscal year 2026, $131 billion through the appropriations process, and over $150 billion included in the reconciliation bill. This is just over 3% of GDP, and some Republican lawmakers believe it's insufficient.
Four main adversaries: Xi Jinping and his Chinese Communist Party, Vladimir Putin's militarized Russia, Kim Jong-un's North Korea, and the Ayatollahs. Clearly, such a budget plan would allow the military balance to continue, as it has been, to tilt away from the United States and toward Communist China.
Democratic senators pressed Secretary Hegseth on whether the U.S. will take actions against Iran.
Most of what I can or should say would be reserved for a classified setting. I would say the president, obviously, any decisions on this matter are at the presidential level. He has communicated very clearly for quite some time.
I do understand that, Mr. Secretary, but my question for you is whether you have been asked actively to provide options for the president regarding a strike in the Middle East.
If I had or I had not, I wouldn't disclose that in this forum, Senator.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, who is not in the Appropriations Committee, demanded this Wednesday that senators have a private briefing on the situation in Iran. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
TikTok is getting an under 90-day reprieve. President Trump is set to sign an executive order delaying the sale or ban law. The law went into effect in January. It requires a TikTok ban in the U.S. unless it's sold by its China-based parent company ByteDance. Neither has happened yet, as Trump continues to delay the law's enforcement. The White House says Trump does not want TikTok to go dark. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt says the administration will work over the next 3 months to make sure the sale goes through. She says the goal is to let Americans keep using TikTok with confidence their data is safe and secure. U.S. concerns over TikTok also center around the Chinese regime's control of the company and its ability to influence public opinion. The app has 170 million users in the U.S. Senators are signaling support for new legislation that would let the president withhold U.S. funding for the World Anti-Doping Agency. This comes as some U.S. officials pushing the organization to make reforms, saying the agency needs to show that it's not compromised by Chinese influence. NTD Steve Land spoke with Dion Kohler, law professor at the University of Baltimore, for insight.
Dion Kohler, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you with us. So you testified before the United States Senate, this as it was examining the World Anti-Doping Agency's handling of alleged Chinese influence. If you could, outline for us what this issue is all about.
Well, the issue's been going on for a long time, Steve, and it's not just about potential Chinese influence in the World Anti-Doping Agency. It's really about the fact that, and I think the U.S. has gone on record about this for years now, that the World Anti-Doping Agency just isn't operating with the kind of transparency that we would hope it would have. It's not operating with the kind of accountability that we would hope it would have. And several examples of high-profile state-sponsored doping, for instance, by Russia at the Sochi Games. Then we have the 23 Chinese swimmers who were recently cleared and then participated in 2 Olympics. We just haven't had the transparency around these cases. They've come to light for the international community because of whistleblowers, courageous whistleblowers. And so I think what the U.S. is looking for and has been asking for is just more transparency, more accountability, so that we can be sure the rules of the World Anti-Doping Code are being followed.
Now, criticism of China's role has drawn bipartisan support from both the previous Biden administration as well as Trump currently. You argued that the United States is not behaving politically or hypocritically in raising this issue. Walk us through what you meant.
Well, the World Anti-Doping Agency has gone on record in media reports as saying the U.S. is behaving politically. This is just a hypocritical stance because we aren't doing what we need to be doing towards the global anti-doping movement. And Steve, I got to tell you, I've been a critter. I've criticized the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency in years past. But there's one thing that's for sure, and they're independent and they make the tough calls. We have taken action against lots of high-profile athletes. We aren't being hypocritical. What the World Anti-Doping Agency doesn't understand is that the United States is unique in the world, Steve, in the way that sports is conducted in this area. High school sports, college sports, professional sports, all are different legal contexts, and we can't just force the World Anti-Doping Code onto those different environments in which sport is conducted, but they all do, in fact, prohibit doping in sports, and so we're doing our part.
Now, I want to read something here that Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn said, quote, "The World Anti-Doping Agency has allowed communist China and Russia to lie, cheat, and steal, putting American athletes at risk," end quote. Right now, potential legislation calls for withholding U.S. funding from the World Doping Agency. Or could you talk to us if you think that this would ultimately be a step in the right direction?
Well, I do think it's a step in the right direction. And of course, the U.S. has to, be part of the world community on this. The U.S. wants to be a leader in the world community in the fight against doping. But withholding our contribution to WADA would be a way to say that business as usual, the status quo, is really unacceptable, that we need that greater independence and transparency, especially around cases, for instance, that involve Russia and China. We need that greater transparency because we know that athletes who are doping, who are not disqualified, very often go on to win medals, and it does cheat the system.
And given that the U.S. is one of the agency's largest funders, how might the United States leverage that to apply pressure or change short of withdrawing funds?
Well, I think withdrawing its funding means that the World Anti-Doping Agency, they're certainly going to be able to continue their operations, but the World Anti-Doping Agency will have to take notice. It will affect their bottom line. But I think the impact is greater than that, Steve. It's about the statement it makes to the world community that the U.S. is not going to sit by and continue with the status quo when we've just seen way too many examples at this point that WADA's independence is compromised. And we just can't keep showing up at different Olympic Games and losing medals and then finding out later that the athletes were doping.
To your point, lastly, why would you say that this is worth fighting, given the fact that it's such an uphill battle?
Well, the fight against doping in sport is one that's been going on for decades and decades, Steve, but we've made some real progress. And creating the World Anti-Doping Agency, creating the United States Anti-Doping Agency, we've really moved the needle. And I think we have to continue that momentum. And we're 25 years in on WADA, and we need to continue to make the improvements and keep fighting the fight.
Professor Dion Kohler, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Coming up, Senate Republicans want to close loopholes allowing China to buy land near key U.S. military sites, but what's really at stake? And a Pacific island, once a strategic site in World War II, is losing $11 million in aid from its main donor, New Zealand. More on what this says about Beijing's expanding influence in the region. More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meier. Senate Republicans are pushing a new bill to safeguard sensitive U.S. military sites from foreign adversaries, including China. Senate Banking Committee Chairman Tim Scott announced the legislation. Let's zoom in.
The Protect Our Bases Act would strengthen the ability of the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States to review land purchases by foreign buyers. The bill would require member agencies to annually update their records on military, intelligence, and national laboratory facilities. Senator Scott's statement pointed to a Chinese company, the Fufeng Group, Fufeng is the second largest producer of xanthan gum in mainland China and allegedly has ties to the Chinese Communist Party. In 2022, the company announced it would purchase land near Grand Forks Air Force Base in North Dakota. The city of Grand Forks ultimately blocked the proposed transaction. Nevertheless, Scott's office said it highlighted a significant flaw in the review process of foreign land purchases.
New Zealand is hitting pause on $11 million in aid to the Cook Islands, citing concerns over recent agreements the islands made with China. The Cook Islands served as a logistical base for Allied forces during World War II. Let's take a closer look.
We actually have responsibility for matters around defence and security, and as a result, what we've said from the beginning of the year, we were unhappy and dissatisfied with the fact that the Cook Islands government wasn't open and transparent about its international agreements.
The two neighbors share an agreement that allows Cook Islands residents to travel freely to New Zealand and hold New Zealand passports. They also share the same military, but New Zealand's Prime Minister is worried deals between the Cook Islands and China are hurting the relationship, and that the Cook Islands was required to consult New Zealand before signing them. Some of those deals remain a secret. Cook Islands Prime Minister Mark Brown tried to downplay the significance of the amount frozen and told local lawmakers it's just a temporary funding pause.
A petition aimed at stopping China's ongoing crime of forced organ harvesting, now receiving over 190,000 signatures worldwide. This CCP state-backed human rights violation has been used to propel China's transplant industry for decades, enriching CCP cadres. Studies suggest the regime mainly targets prisoners of conscience, including the spiritual group Falun Gong. To unpack it, NTD's Steve Lance sat down with Dr. Torsten Trey, founder and executive director of Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting.
Dr. Torsten Trey, thanks so much for sitting down with us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
It's really great to have you with us. Dr. Trey, we're talking about something that you've described as an ongoing crime against humanity. For those hearing about this for the first time, what exactly is happening, and why do you think it sometimes may feel like the world seems to look away?
Yeah, we are talking about forced organ harvesting. That is a systematic practice basically only observed in China, where victims, vulnerable people, prisoners of conscience are used as an organ source. They are listed in categories like blood type, etc. And on demand, when a patient comes, those people will be killed and the organs will be removed for transplantation. This is something that exceeds even what happened in the Nazi concentration camps, when the Nazi doctors were just conducting experiments on the prisoners. In this case, it is even turned into a profit through transplantation. If there are people who are not following the CCP doctrines, but they believe in truthfulness, compassion, forbearance, good values, freedom, they are basically becoming subject to this crime.
Now, your organization, DAFO, Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting, has initiated a petition last year. 190,000 people have signed this petition, which is actually addressed to the G7,
yes,
which is coming up.
Yes.
What exactly are you demanding of these world leaders?
Yeah, our organization initiated a petition in 2012, and for 5 years we collected signatures. Actually 3 million signatures, and that petition was addressed to the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva. We went to Geneva 3 times, but the office did actually nothing about it. We addressed this time the petition to the governments of the G7 countries and another 7 countries to let the voice of the people who signed the petition speak to those governments, and let them know, well, there are right now 190,000 in 1 year. Let's see what will happen in the next year. The petition has basically asked for a joint statement from these G7 governments, and we want to ask them to condemn forced organ harvesting and to call for an end of the forced organ harvesting in China.
You have spoken to numerous victims, witnesses, defectors. Has there ever been any particular testimony that's really struck you that has sort of propelled you to keep on in this fight?
Oh, many. many. Like there are witnesses who almost escaped the forced organ harvesting, and I cannot say which one was like the most dramatic, but in one case there was a practitioner. He was held in a hospital in a ward with no other patients on that ward. He was asked to take to wear a gown, and they pushed the bed with him to the operating room. And only in the last minute he understood. They say abort, abort, because of public pressure. In another case, a Falun Gong practitioner was arrested for handing out information material, and he was arrested, taken to the hospital, and they wanted to draw blood from him, and he refused it. And he said, "I don't want that." And then the policeman said, "Why not?" And he answered, "Because you want to take my organs." And then the policeman said, "This is exactly what we want to do." So there are moments like this where there was literal verbal admission that forced organ harvesting is on the agenda. That's very dramatic.
The gravity is
yes,
really palpable.
Yeah.
Well, you have an event, a virtual event tomorrow.
Yes.
Tell us about this.
Yes, we related to the petition, we organized a webinar which takes place in Calgary, where the G7 takes place at 11 a.m. local time, and we invited different speakers to just inform the public about recent information that we collected about the meaning of the petition, of the importance to speak up. If patients are tempted to skip the waiting line here, which is sometimes 5 years for a kidney transplant, and they know they can get a kidney within 2 weeks, they are tempted to go to China. But they might not know that they are actually initiating the killing of the organ source. So in this case, they become complicit by not knowing that this is happening. So it's utterly important, and that's why it's our first call on the petition, to inform the medical doctors and the public in each country about this practice.
It's really an issue of just such great significance, and we appreciate your voice in raising this concern.
Sure. Thank you.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meier. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.